The Torah, especially in favorite Devarim, in Parshat Azinu, enjoins us time and again to remember. Sefer, Zohar, these are words that have great permanence and resonance in the life, in the way we pray, in the way we live, in the way we inspire the next generation. Without reflecting on what was, we can never be what we are, and we can never hope for what will be. And so even in his last words, never forget. Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader of the Jewish people, in his parting address, in his final drasha, in his final sermon, formulated in poetic style, he tells his beloved people, Zechor Yemos Olam, Binu shenos dor v'dor she'al avicha v'yagedecha zikeinecha v'yomru loch. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of ages past. Ask your father, he will inform you. And most importantly, zikeinecha v'yomru loch. Your elders, ask them, learn from them. They will inspire, they will inform, they will tell you. But here it's how the commentaries explain what Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching to his beloved Jewish people, and hence us here as we are assembled, those of you who are here with us in person and those who are gathered via Zoom. What Moshe Rabbeinu adds here is that the remembrance of historical events, those remembrance, those thoughts, those dates, just as historical facts alone, is just not sufficient. It's not enough. But rather, a person has to consider, a person has to contemplate them in order to understand them and to appreciate their significance, to understand what the message of those who came before us. And albeit that tonight's gathering reflects on one of the darkest times in modern history, and its circumstance still relates to us so profoundly and so deeply. The Gemara tells us, "Kishem shemevarchim al hatov mevarich al hara," we make blessing on that which is hard and painful and sad, because it's appropriate for us to face any and all circumstances with a sense of perspective, faith unbroken, faith while challenged, but faith which gathers us in this room and next door, in Batei Knesios and Beis Medrash around the world, and in our homes, reflecting on what was, and inspiring the present that animates a robust and very strong future. I'm so happy that there are my children and others who are here tonight to hear the stories of our survivors and those who grew up with parents who were survivors as well. Tonight, as we gather to remember the 6 million who perished al Kiddush Hashem, the 600 million descendants of those who died, those descendants that we will never know, those descendants that we carry their legacy in our hearts, in our souls, that we educate the next generation in a most profound and most meaningful way. I'll just conclude my remarks this evening by saying, as I often do at our annual gathering, the words of Gideon Hausner in his opening remarks at the Eichmann trial. He said, "When I stand before you here, judges of Israel, to lead the prosecution of Adolf Eichmann, I am not standing alone. With me stand 6 million accusers, but they cannot rise to their feet and point an accusing finger towards him who sits in the dark and cry, 'I accuse.' For their ashes are piled up on the hills of Auschwitz, the hills of Buchenwald, the fields of Treblinka, and are strewn in the forests throughout Poland and Eastern Europe. Their graves are scattered throughout the length and breadth of Europe. Their blood, it cries out, but their voice is not heard. And so therefore, I will be their spokesman, and in their name, I will unfold the awesome indictment." Gideon Hausner, April 1961, Attorney General of the State of Israel. So tonight we raise our voice and we hear stories, we gain perspective and we reflect and we remember. Tonight that we are so thankful to be able to have beloved Chef Mayor and Michael Spett, survivors, who tell their story and whose legacy we hold tight and promise to secure forever. Tonight's program will begin, if I could please ask beloved Chef Mayor and Michael to please come forward to light these 6 candles to commemorate the 6 million who perished.
Trying to light the schedule not only for the people we know having in Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and all the camps in the concentration camps, but I'm lighting the candle for all the people what we don't know what they are, and that includes me, beloved mother. I don't know. She was in the last march when she was out concentration. I asked from the Red Cross to find out if we get them. So I like to tell them for all this, what we don't know what they are.
Yes, I can follow up on Mayor's words. I can only remember, well, I never knew them, but had about 8 of my family that were perished. And again, most of them unknown. Did you hear me all right? Yeah, well, the cousins and aunts and uncles and my grandmother died in Theresienstadt about 3 weeks after she got there from ISIS. In their memory, ISIS also like as well as the meetings. Getting too good.
Comforted by the words of David HaMelech, King David, we offer 2 chapters of Tehillim. We pray for salvation and for Geula and for a night that inspires us. So, Mizmor LeDavid Adonai Roi, Lo Yachsar. Bina Deshi Arbitzeni Aleinu Luchos Hina Aleini. Nachni Shodei Yanfeni V'Magli Tzedek V'Man Shelo. Gam Ki Eilech V'Geitz Al Moves Lo Yirah Ki Ata Yimadi Shivtecha Misham Etecha. Hema Yinat Amoni. Taros Lefonesh Mufane Negit Zerunai Dishan Tam Shem Roshi. Kolisiri Vayar. Chesed Yudifuni Kol Mechayai. Visharti B'Beis Adonai Li'arech Yomini. A song of David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in green pastures, he leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul, he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even when I walk in the valley, shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries, you anointed my head with oil, my cup it overflows. Only goodness, kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I dwell in the house of the Lord for a length of days. Chapter 130. Shir Hamalos, Mimama Kikinos, Kadino. Adonai Shalai, Beniti, Elon, Kashivos, the Kol, Kachamino. Imagonas, Tishmayo, Adonai, Yalo. In Christ, we saw the man and the Kivisi Adonai, Kimisam, Nafshi, Libaram, Nafshi Adonai, Mishamrim, Naboker, Shamrim, Naboker. Song of ascent from the depths. I have called you, O Lord. O Lord, hearken to my voice. May your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. O God, if you keep a record of iniquities, O Lord, who will stand? For forgiveness is with you in order that you be feared. I hoped, O Lord, yea, my soul hoped, and I wait for his word. My soul is to the Lord among those who await the morning, those who await the morning. Israel hoped to the Lord, for kindness is with the Lord, and much redemption is with him. And he will redeem Israel from all their iniquities. Amen. I would like to ask at this time the three other panelists to join us here, our esteemed President, Sidney Sedovitz, our esteemed past President and head Rabbi, Dr. Yaakov Elephant, and Peggy Linker to please join us at the front. As part of what we will have a meaningful armchair conversation and discussion to learn the stories of and be inspired by their presence here tonight.
Everyone, I want to thank the five of you for being here with us this evening, our survivors, children of survivors. All of you with very meaningful stories to share, lives that have been lived in very meaningful and very profound ways. I know that each and every one of you have the choice fitting your stories to your children and pass it over to our community for many, many years. Dear beloved Chef, I will start with you, if that's okay. This year was a fascinating year. COVID, of course, brought us and the world to its knees. But in the midst of it all, you, with your beautiful and powerful, resounding voice, together with a community that stood behind you, gave voice to a very loud Holocaust denier in the form of the principal of Spanish High School. And we couldn't have been more proud of you and stood behind you. Tell us what that meant for you. Tell us what it is that we are to have learned from that experience in the year 2021, having just endured this very painful pandemic. And please God to come out of it.
I was just going to say about the Holocaust experience and the school that was there. I want to thank the whole congregation that stood behind me a whole year, what I went through. They tried to not to examine it, but they could, but they could. Say the topic continues to evolve. But what you try to help. Continue to do the core in the long term here. The leadership of our brother, but he's one at a time. Like, appreciate brother. Everything involved building. He came to my house. Despite the corona, everything. You danced in front of my house. Gain anything for me. The experience what I had, the experience what I had in the Lord, they gave me a little bit that I could go and stay in front of them and tell them exactly what I feel. hungry. Why they don't say the truth to their children what really happened? Why they allow the bigots to come out and say that the Holocaust never happened? I told them, and I told them, I'm sitting here in a courtroom, and you have to judge. And among you is a sheriff sitting there and observing you how you can judge the situation. That's we are a nation, we are people, Jewish people, what our storytellers. What comes this whole story from storytellers? From Adam and Eve, they told stories. You can go to Noah, so their stories. You can go to Abraham Avinu, his stories. Just the story what that comes now is the Holocaust. That's the biggest story of our time, of ever. What here are people who are telling the truth, because that's what is in the Torah written, the truth. And as long as we will not go and teach our children and everybody else to tell them the truth, what happened, that they should never forget it.
Mayor, tell us a little, if you can, for just a moment. What was it like living in the times before the war? Tell us a little bit briefly about your childhood, right before.
My memory brings me back. Right to say, like my wife, I tell her, I can remember the night 2 years old. I come from a very Orthodox family, both sides, my father's side, my mother's side. My father's side is my safety because we had a halo. And I tried to go to this halo. Start. My father my grandma, my mother's parents, I was called because he was great honor for me. But I know even today, I know in his steps. I want to be like him. Because I'm very tight person. That is strong, the difference. I grew up by him. It was good for us. Not like grandfather, just official statement, it must be trained to go along with this. And lost in me, so my father took me to and then I go to public school. Morning to 1 o'clock, and from 2 o'clock up to back to the faith. That's just until 1939, 39. The Nazis came into our city. 1939 Christmas. We did not know what to do. Who they ever saw, whatever they saw, if they did not know Jews, not to they started to kill out everybody. People who ran away to schools, they hide in the schools, they take them along, they school. They took people around the home, and they shot them there. That was chaos. The thief in 1939, 1st of September, it was chaos. Oh, second.
Mayor, if I remember correctly, I think you had mentioned that the hometown that you are from and Mr. and Mrs. Sperber of blessed memory. Was there a similarity from a hometown that you were from?
I was,
Yeah.
it's not the same. Not to recognition. Oh. I took my two boys. My wife was to Poland. And there,
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Mr. and Mrs. Sperber or the Levitt members of our community, your parents. Tell us a little bit, if you can, about their childhood, their reflections, if you can, their hometown, and what life was like before the war as well.
Thank you. Well, my parents, were both Hungarian speaking. My father grew up, in Czechoslovakia, north of Hungary. My mother grew up in Budapest. My father, I used to, ask him all the time if like he came from Anatevka because I was, being smart. And he got very insulted because he came from a city called Darmstadt, which was actually a vibrant town. It wasn't a shtetl, it wasn't anything like that. And he grew up with several brothers and sisters. He was in the middle. And went to later and he had that life, a very happy life. Later, when older, he ended up going to Budapest to study there and work there, actually. My mom had a completely different experience. She grew up just one of two. She just had one brother and grew up in Budapest, relatively well off. Her father owned a lumberyard, her grandfather, and she went to the gymnasium school, and she led a really kind of an upper class life. And her experience, going through the 30s and 40s was very different than my father. My father, basically, he was in Auschwitz at the end of the war, for the last year, because that's, sort of how it worked with the Hungarian Jews. And my mom was hidden in various different locations, kind of like Andrew. So she was not the only Jew that was hidden behind a bookcase or a wall. And he Red Cross home and Red Cross State House and all sorts of so they had very, very different experiences. But it was, they unfortunately had this beautiful life that was taken away from them. It's something that, stayed with them for the rest of their lives, although they didn't talk about it very much.
I know you mentioned to me that you see yourself more as a Holocaust escapee than more a survivor. Tell us, if you can, a little bit, you can use this microphone, a little bit about what it was like on that journey, your incredible story, how you were able to escape. Tell us, if you can.
I still begin by telling the story of my father, who he was born in Poland, but Georgia, but his family moved, went immigrated to Germany. So in the First World War, he became, he was an Austrian citizen with Poland, that part of the world. Anyway, he was well established there. He's part of Germany. And printing plants. And when Hitler came to power, these days, when there's a coup or a new government, they take over the government, they grab the television stations, the first thing it would be was grab or close down the Jewish printing plants. And one night, he got a call my father from a friend who was in the police department. He says, "You better get out of town, they're coming for you tomorrow." This was 1933, and so he went to Belgium, and that's where I was born. Anyway, answer about his question, our escape was when Brussels was born, bombed, and the 8th of May. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, we left on the last train to France, and that was bombed, and it took 3 days to get. Finally, it was sealed in French BCB, and they wouldn't let anybody off the train. We wound up in Bordeaux, and through a ruse, where again the train was sealed. And I always preface this story when I'm telling kids in junior high school or the middle school. They expect somebody to tell them about cancer. So I ask, how many of you have asthma? And they're kind of surprised, and they look around, and one raises, two raises, and I ask, how many of you have a faith having an asthma attack? And sure enough, most of them do at the end, because that was what my father told me, and I was 4 years old at the time. And with that, he got to see the station master, and they told him, my son had that we were the only ones to get off that train, which ultimately wound up in the French detention camps, which were also very technical, and often later on, many people wound up in Auschwitz also. But with that, we were able to escape and get from the Portuguese consul in Bordeaux, France. Contrary to the dictator's orders not to let any Jews and Gypsies or everybody, don't give many visas. He gave visas to over 10,000 Jews at the cost of his career and his lands. He was Aristide and an aristocrat landed property. And the name is D'Souza Mendes. Aristide D'Souza Mendes, who was among the righteous Yad Vashem, and now highly decorated. But so with that, we got to Portugal and ultimately that story about the asthma is just that my father was resourceful enough to think, I want to get out of here. I don't want to go. As a matter of fact, whenever we were together on the subway in New York, or there was a breakdown and everybody looked one direction, he said, and go the other way. He always wanted to go the other way, not once. But any other questions you want to ask? But that's why I call myself an escapee, because I've got don't have anyone. So much of my family did not get out of Europe and America.
Thank you, Michael. So the two-part question for you, Sid, and for Kenny, and for Doc. So tell us, if you can, what, if anything, growing up as children of survivors, what that was like, how that was different from the children who you were raised with, your communities that were not children of survivors. Part one. And part two of that is, if you can, the stories that your families might have told you, or maybe they didn't tell you, and what kind of impact that had on your childhood, your adolescence, and of course, as you came to the stages of your life.
So my mother was survival. I was goods. Vegetables. My father was a partisan fighter in the woods. And then a lot of things to tell us. Um, being raised in a family of Holocaust survivors was a family that was completely child-centered, very, very little. My parents hid much of what happened to them in the war, and my sister and I, much of what we had learned over time did not come from my parents, but came from other family members. We were shielded very much from the horrors that they had gone through. In my mother's later years in her life, unfortunately, she would hear her screaming in her sleep, in her nightmares. And sometimes she would say, they were here to shut me, which is the word that always struck me as shocking for people. But that was the word that she used. I think I was blessed that I knew very little. And we lived in communities in the Bronx where there were other survivors' families. These were people who had come after the war, not wealthy. We all went to yeshiva, parents struggled. They gave everything that they had to raise their children, spent all of their money on their children. So I never felt particularly damaged or missing things that other children may have had. And as I grew up and succeeded, they lived their life through me. They felt very, very lucky that they had survived.
My father grew up in a town, a small town in Czechoslovakia. There are 4,000 Jews, 3,700 did not come back. My father, being a health provider with my grandfather on Main Dancer was a dentist in cardio. So Nazis, because they were short of dentists, they allowed my father's family to stay until 1944. And when the second transport came to that town on Sukkot, a picture here of the shul that's left in my father's town, the loving sold in the canister of that bima. I was at that shul, and when I walked into the shul, the Machzorim was still open, the prayer books were still open for the Sukkot. So when my father's family knew that the second transport was coming, they hid in a cave. Actually, it was through Pesach. My father was free on the 7th day of Pesach. And to answer the rabbi's first question, Father talked about it 24/7. That was his whole life. And I think it gives you a certain perspective on the world, on people, good or bad. I'm not going to say either way at this point, but it gives you a certain perspective on the non-Jewish world and how Jews have been treated throughout the generation. It also builds, there's no doubt in my mind that all the people sitting on this stage, especially the children, the Holocaust survivors, were wired very differently than most people. Just from a personal standpoint, I know that I'll go into a business meeting and I'll sometimes say the most outlandish thing. Because I said to myself before I walked into this meeting, our fathers and our grandfathers, they suffered so much worse. What's the worst that these people are going to say to me? No, that's the worst thing they're going to say to me. I'm going to put down that offer, that business idea that is so outlandish. But again, we're all wired, children of Holocaust survivors are wired very differently. I will tell you that my father talked about his experience 24/7 since I'm a child. He left us two messages. Message number one. And this is something that our school, with the leadership of our rabbi, is an incredible example. You have to remember that Hitler, Shimo, he went back 5 generations. He didn't care whether somebody was a strappel wearer, a gown wearer, a modern Orthodox Jew, a non-Orthodox Jew, conservative, reform. He didn't care. He went back 5 generations. If there was any connection to Judaism, they took you out and shot you, or they took you to concentration camp. And one of the lessons that my father taught us as children is that our love for the Jewish people has to be all inclusive. It doesn't mean that we have to accept everybody's lifestyle or the way they live, but as a one Jew to another, it is our responsibility to love every Jew. And this is exemplified by our rabbi and the way he leads our shul. Number 2, that is, it is our responsibility, not just my responsibility, it's your responsibility. As I told my oral surgeon in office the other day, who's not religious, and he wants to make sure that his children marry Jews, I said, it's your responsibility as much as it's my responsibility to pass on the legacy and the heritage of the Jewish people to the next generation. That's our responsibility. And if anything is going to be atoned for this disaster of the 6 million that were unfortunately killed, and as the rabbi said, and all the children of the next generation that we never have seen, it's for us to continue their legacy and their Judaism and their observance of Judaism. I just want to comment on what Chef Mayer said, that he spoke so eloquently at the court on the Board of Education regarding the denial of the Holocaust that they made. You know, I went on the last day of Pesach to visit Eli Lutz to wish him mazel tov because his son got engaged. So Eli's mother is sitting there. Happened to be Eli's name. Eliezer Simcha is named after my uncle who lost his 1 children. Eli's mother, whose grandmother, Eli's mother, Gibby, whose grandmother is my aunt. She lost 2 children in the Holocaust. Her name is on the side of her grave. And for anybody who thinks that this tragedy and this Holocaust never exists, just needs to talk to people and imagine, God forbid, you Mrs. Schlesinger, an incredible lady who moved into our community. Her father lost his wife, sons, daughters in the Holocaust and was able to get out and start a new life. So anybody who thinks that this tragedy never existed, just needs to talk to people and just try to put ourselves in such a position that God forbid that we would lose a parent, a sibling, or a child. What would we think about it?
I don't know how holiday. Because that's beautiful, beautiful. But going back to what it's like to grow up as a child of survivors, my experience is probably different than everybody here, only because I grew up in Detroit, not New York. So the community is very different there. And in my particular class, when I went to school, I probably was the only one who had 2 European parents who didn't necessarily speak English in the house. My parents spoke Hungarian. And, because I was a very curious child, and more nosy than curious, I wanted to know what was going on, so I understood the language, I understood and I could speak it. My brother wasn't interested and didn't. But, so things were, always felt a little bit different than, everybody else who grew up American. His parents, all spoke English, and in kind of the insular community in Detroit, all elementary school and high school together. They were all friends that all knew each other. So we were always kind of felt like we were a little bit on the outside. So I don't always feel different just from that perspective. I also had who worked full time, actually more than full time, because my parents were in the food business. They were kosher caterers, and they worked a lot. They were not home, so we had babysitters. And when I got old enough, I was going to stay with my brother, who's about almost 5 years younger. And so things felt a little different for us. My parents couldn't socialize a lot because they were working all the time. And it was, expectations. The expectations when you're a child of survivor are different. Your parents, or at least what you put on yourself, because even if they didn't talk to you about what happened, you knew that they had gone through this horrible, horrible tragedy, that they suffered so many losses and it changed their lives. So to the point that you never want to do anything that would have hurt them or disappoint them. And you try to excel to make up for all the things that they had lost because, maybe they couldn't have completed their education. My dad couldn't, he couldn't finish school. My mom couldn't finish school either, but that was for different reasons because she actually didn't move to the state until the communists took over Hungary. She stayed after the war for quite a few years. My dad went to Israel. He was given the choice of getting money from Germany, or they would, send him to Israel. He lived in Netanya for 3 years until he got too lonely and moved to New York, which he didn't like very much. Ended up in Detroit, where he met my mother about a week later at a party, which was, very sure. So it's a very different life when you grow up as a child of a survivor. My parents didn't talk a lot about their stories, so you could piece together things. My dad finally, at the end of his life, started to get a little more open. Unfortunately, he was, losing his memory and was suffering from dementia toward the end. But he was able to start opening up a little bit more, but he kept everything inside. My mom, we knew a little bit more about her background, which is very, very different. And because she wasn't in camps, even though she suffered terribly because Hungarians were terrible to the Jews, even though the Nazis themselves were not involved until 1944. She spoke a lot more, so we knew what she had gone through a little bit more. But I don't know what it's like to be not for 12 survivors. What's the difference? If somebody tells me what it's like to grow up not that way, I don't know. But I know our expectations and the things that were expected of us and what we expected of ourselves were really different than perhaps what others thought.
I just want to say one thing about the fact that my parents spoke very little to me. My mother comes from a family of 12 children. And one of her brothers, older brother, also was married with 6 children. And his wife and 6 children were all killed. And ultimately, he was able to move to Canada with us. And he was so secretive about his past. He remarried, had a daughter, and he never told his daughter about The rest of us knew, the rest of us in the family knew. But his own daughter didn't. And literally on his deathbed, he told his daughter. So, none of us, we had different experiences. Obviously, Yaakov, different experience. But in my family, they were very sick. And that was the case with their brothers and sisters. Our family, my mother's family, in her 11, the brothers and sisters. Since she was in fact the youngest, my brothers and sisters being older, there were 45 children, 45 first cousins of mine. Every single one of them. Okay. People didn't talk.
Say, would you say, would it be fair to say that children of Holocaust survivors, as you said, as opposed to children of non-Holocaust survivors, are more sensitive to anti-Semitism and to a red flag that may be going on here or around the world, as opposed to children who grew up in America, enjoyed a wonderful childhood, and maybe read Eli Wiesel's book, Night, maybe, and as opposed to us, whether our parents did tell us that, but we knew that what happened. That's it.
I think that, yes, I think that it's so ingrained in your mind of what happened, and even if you didn't hear the actual story, you can picture in your mind what happened to your parents or your, whoever, whatever your family members were, and because there's so much out there to read, you can sort of, put it and apply it into your own family. So for me, it's always a presence, that, it's almost moving, like, there's always a Nazi somewhere behind my shoulder. I always feel that, I can close my eyes and I can picture what a camp would be like, even though God forbid I don't know the exact experience, but it's always present. I think so, when I was growing up, a long time ago, the kids, because it was still not that far out, the generations, it hadn't been as many years, they understood more than I think, generations today, unfortunately, with even my own kids, trying to instill it. But I think it was still, maybe 25, 30 years later, yes, they still felt it because there were still grandparents, that they had been survived. Even if their own parents weren't actual survivors, their grandparents were, or they knew somebody close, or there was a friend or a neighbor. I think it's a little different.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think that I am more sensitive as a Holocaust survivor. I think my parents did instill that in me. And my parents, as yours did, instilled in me that all Jews should be loved and respected for who they are, period, irrespective of anything. And that sort of insular Greek identity, we are the Jews, everyone else is not, does to some of the feelings that you just
I know that you were in quite a number of camps over a number of years, football being your last stop. Tell us, if you can, for just a moment, two things. The first, What was the day like in Bochum? And number two, how did you have the inner strength day in and day out? What did you hold on to? How were you able to survive from within?
I came to talk about after I went to school for 30 years of camps, but the first 1939 till to I came to talk about I went through 9 different camps. The first camp was the post-labor camps. That was Holland, Germany, and then started in 1943. At the beginning of 1943, that started Holocaust. Final solution. And there was the first one. What I was the Listener. It was contact with outfits. For that one, I went to Cross Bronson. It was another one who was an outfit. And from Cross Bronson, after 2 weeks to be on the train to work. It was in 1944. Then we went from the Cross Bronson to go to work. Then I came to talk about that I was the same direction what I love. The chief rabbi of Israel, he was a Wojcik, Chinese, but his brother and his wings survived because of his brother. The life in the book about was not only that for us, it was the 1933, the first one from Cape Town was the Germans. The first one was the Germans who came into Bochum. Hitler took all the Germans with all the Turtles, murderers. They took them to Bochum. The next one was the Jews were coming into Bochum. And they were released from Bochum in 1933. Somebody there was there. I did not work more than because it was not trying power. Other part of the people out in the hunting class every day. The life was very bad because each time when we came out to when they were counting because they take out like the ropes a lot of the people send them away to other camps. Then we come out with our people there, we come see obviously everywhere, wherever you go, all the dead people. They had enough food to eat. You did not know what was going to happen from one minute to the other one when you were to the next one. If you're able to what you did for them, because without you, I cannot be here today. You put up a lot with you. Just I told to speak with this, and I can take up with this. You put up a lot. That they always were there for me, especially. Would not make it without us, because I think I still control. Do not forget, each time I have something else, each time I have something else. All of a sudden, my sister has to take your photo.
quite a number of people are watching this evening on Zoom. And one of them just texted me a question for Sid, Jenny, and Don. Do you think your parents would look at the world today and think it's a better place to live? Or does it resemble what things look like then? Go first.
So my father passed away in Jerusalem. I flew to Israel to be by his bedside. It was Shabbos, he was in Shari Tzedek, I was sleeping in the nurse's office. And about 1 o'clock Friday night, the nurse taps me on the shoulder and says, "Father wants to see you." So I go to his bed, my father knew that he was dying. And he looked at me and he said, two things. Number one, he said, "I want you to be a good Jew." Number two, in answer to the rabbi's question, he said, "You better have a place here in Israel, north from run to."
Yeah, I grew up in the family, it was constant, we were fully aware of what they all went through. Grew up in Kew Gardens, which is a community that attracted the refugees from, lots from Belgium, Germany, all of Western Europe, and some from Poland also. My father had gone through upsets, and my mother as well, because she was his secretary, they arrested her, she was in prison. Anyway, he always said it can happen here, just like it happened in Germany, it happened in Periscope, Belgium. It can happen here, and you have to be aware of that. And looked at what is going on in the United States in the last 40 years, it would not be too surprised that it could get out of hand, and there's always that danger, and that we have to be fully aware of it. And the first thing we have to do is fight the anti-Semitism and fascism wherever it occurs, and that's the lesson I certainly learned.
So I think that's a very good question. First of all, I think they would say it's a better place because of the existence of the state of Israel. And they would say the Jews have a homeland, the Jews have a place of their own, and the Jews have a place to go. But then they would also say, thinking of it again, and they would look at the world, and the peasant state of Ishanda, and they would say there is a lot of worrisome developments in the world. And they would not fool us. Not even much fool us into thinking that everything is fine.
Well, I mean, this is, I don't know if this applies to any of the other children of survivors, but, you know, we always keep a current passport just for that reason. Just in case, it's, you know, because it's always something that's present in our minds, that just in case something happens, we can go to Israel, we thank God, have a place to escape to and to leave, if God forbid things get horrible. Anybody who knows, remembers my dad, I don't know how many do, it's been a few years since he.
There's so much love. You were very, very different to that community.
Thank you,
Very special. So everybody was there.
thank you. Yes, well, he was a very internal, he kept his emotions very, deep inside, and he always had a smile on his face. He was, you know, he always was the happiest, sweetest, most wonderful man that he thought deeply about things. He read a lot. He read newspapers from cover to cover, magazines, and watched the news. And he would have been very, very disturbed over what has been going on in the past few years with this recurrence. The whole thing with principal would have made him incredibly upset. And he would have, I think it would have, his networks would come back and see what has been going on in the last few years. So.
Okay, we have time for one final question, one final set of thoughts. And that is, if each of you could pass the microphone around. And for just a moment, if you could just address the children that are here, and the children that are watching on Zoom, and the children that will watch this later. Tell them, if you can, how should they feel? What should they do? The faith that they should have. What message would you give them as tonight's program comes to an end?
Saying to the ladies, to bring education to the children. When you lighting the candles Friday night, take the children next to you and put that extra candle in the memory of the Holocaust. Make the brother of the Holocaust. The children, they should never forget. Because you are the people that you can educate them, you can show them the way. That's not, that's a story, not a new story, but I started in the beginning. It's a story, but we start talking stories, but just that's the true story, which other people don't understand it, that we talking stories, that's all the true stories of happened in our life. So don't forget, please, every Friday night, every holiday, put another candle and make the drama of holidays.
I remember, if it was 2 years ago, I was at the needed to have an Indian shepherd training for the kids, boys, and girls too. And Mayor and I were there and told a little bit about stories, and after that we gave him bracha. And I was very moved how fascinated and involved is the word that these boys and girls were, because they're growing up in this wonderful atmosphere of Yiddishkeit and awareness of who we are as a people. And we have to keep on emphasizing what happened, and make sure that we all stick together and take care of one another, and that the unique Jewish people has to be Israel apart, that you have to stick together, and that's to learn the lesson they have to learn. Okay.
Yes, the message I would give is, we're here. Jesus is still here. We won. And God does watch over us. And God does take care of us. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be careful. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be concerned. But at the end of the day, we did win.
From a very different perspective, I look at it a little bit practically. And I worry because we're getting farther and farther away. The years are passing, and it seems more as of a distant memory. So what do we do as far as our young people go to keep this memory and keep it all alive and current to some extent? And I say, because this is what many of you do anyway, watch TV. watch documentaries, talk, if there is anybody that you can talk to, a survivor who's willing to talk, listen to their stories, ask questions. I think this is the real danger, the farther away to get from the era of the Holocaust and Shoah, that we need to educate ourselves and keep the conversation going. And, I personally, as a first generation child of survivors, I feel it's my duty and my obligation to participate in that. And as I edge closer to retirement, that is actually one of my goals. What I would like to do is to educate our youth so that it is something that stays present, current in their minds. And that's just learn everything you can, whatever way you can, whether it's social, not social media, but documentaries, any kind of programming that you can watch. That's what I said, learn about.
Answer the rabbi's question. By reading a last will, the gentleman who didn't think he was going to have a safer, they found this last will with his son's pocket, married to Straw. The father of the author of this book, edited by Nino Fish, who actually is a personal friend of the Renaissance family. And this gentleman who authored this hardcover book hid with my father in the caves during the war. And here's the letter that his father wrote to him that was smuggled back into German prison, which pretty much summarizes everything that we said tonight from all of us on the stage. I was caught here on December 20th, 1944, the 5th day of Hanukkah, Erev Rosh Chodesh Teves, in prison in Mister. I hoped that my forged papers would save me, but after many beatings, and after they discovered I was circumcised, I can no longer deny I was a Jew. And now the good Lord decrees that he wants me to be among the millions of Jews who were being killed. I accept this with love, and I hereby declare that I am a Jew who believes in the celebration of the Lord, and any other thoughts to the contrary may they be null and void. I have no prayer for me to say to be doing the confession in proper order before I die. I will say what's in my heart and pray that it might be accepted as if I had recited it in all in painstaking detail and with pure and holy intent of all the pure and holy Jews who preceded me. One request do I make of my sons, nothing, laser. If God grants them life in the aftermath of this great people, yet to come, that wherever they may be, and remember their mother's your type, Rivka Bachor, Kanye, who died in the prime of her life at the Jewish hospital of Budapest, the third day of February, 5705. May they also remember their sisters, my beloved sweet daughters, Yitta, Suri, and Chaya, who were deported from Hungary to their destruction. Remember also my Lord from Marion, along with their wives and children and grandchildren, all of whom were deported together to the Jews of Hungary. I also ask my dear sons to follow the ways of Hashem and to live amicably among all people. May my soul now return in peace. Naked came my out of the womb alone. I return now alone to the earth, to a place of darkness and desolation. God grant those who survive, those who eluded the angel of death, declare enough to the first earth. May the blood that has been spilled in every corner of the world return to avenge its victim.
Mayor Michael, Sid, Doc. Thank you so much for giving us this evening of reflection and remembrance. Not only was it so meaningful, it's raw and inspirational, but it's given us purpose and perspective. So thank you all so very much. At this time, I'd like to ask everyone to please rise. And to conclude tonight's program with the Kelman Rashmi Memorial Prayer. God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence. The lofty levels of the holy and the pure ones who shine like a glow of the firmament of souls. The holy and the pure ones who were killed, who were murdered, who were slaughtered, who were burned, who were drowned, who were strangled. The sanctification of thy name. For the hands of the German oppressors and their accomplices may their name and may their memory be obliterated. Without making a vow, contribute to charity in remembrance of their souls. May their resting place be the Garden of Eden, therefore may the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shelter of his wings for eternity, and may he bind their holy souls in the bond of life. Hashem is their heritage, and may they repose in peace on the resting places. And together we respond. Amen. That concludes our program for this evening. I thank you, dear survivors and children of survivors, and I thank each and every one of you who are here with us in person and those who participated via Zoom. May tonight's evening of remembrance and reflection continue to inspire, uplift, and motivate us all to live in the memory of the atrocity as it was, to inspire the present, continue to hope for the tikvah, the Yeshua, the hope of the Jewish people. Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael. Wish everybody a wonderful evening. In front will take place next door at 7:25 in just a few moments.